The doctor looked at my test results, then looked at me, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. Finally, he said something that made the room feel like it had stopped breathing. "You have about 3 months." 3 months. That's how long the doctors believed I had left to live. I remember staring at him, waiting for him to correct himself, waiting for him to say the words every patient hopes to hear. We might be wrong, but he didn't. Instead, he closed the folder slowly and gave me a sympathetic look that told me everything I needed to know. At 43 years old, sitting in a quiet office at Evergreen Medical Center in Seattle, my future disappeared in a single sentence. My children, my husband, my dreams. Everything suddenly had an expiration date. Oh, but the strange thing is, that moment wasn't the end of my story. In fact, it was the beginning of a life I never expected to live, and 4 years later, I'm still here. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and before the diagnosis, my life was ordinary in the most beautiful way. I lived with my husband David and our 2 kids in a quiet neighborhood just outside Seattle, Washington. Our house wasn't huge, but it was warm and full of life. In the front yard stood a tall maple tree that turned bright orange every autumn. In the backyard, my son Ethan had worn patches into the grass from practicing soccer almost every afternoon. Inside the house, there was always noise, laughter, music, the occasional sibling argument over something trivial. It was the kind of chaos that makes a house feel alive. Most mornings began the same way. My alarm would buzz softly at 6:15 a.m., long before the kids woke up. I would slip quietly out of bed and walk into the kitchen while the rest of the house remained peaceful and still. The first thing I always did was brew coffee. The smell would slowly fill the kitchen as the Seattle sky outside the window shifted from dark gray to pale morning light. Sometimes I would just stand there for a moment, holding the warm mug in my hands, enjoying the quiet. Those were my favorite moments of the day. Simple, calm, normal. After a few minutes, the peaceful silence would end as the house came alive. Footsteps in the hallway, the sound of the bathroom sink running, my daughter, Lily, asking where her school shoes are, my son Ethan complaining that his cereal didn't have enough milk. It was messy and loud and perfect. After breakfast chaos, and we would rush out the door together. David would head to work at the engineering firm where he had worked for nearly 15 years. I would drop the kids off at school before driving into downtown Seattle. I worked as a graphic designer at a marketing agency, and I loved the creative freedom. My desk sat near a large window overlooking the city streets below. Some days, I designed logos for new businesses. Other days, I worked on advertisements or brand campaigns. There was something deeply satisfying about turning ideas into visuals. During lunch breaks, I would often walk to a nearby cafe or grab coffee at Starbucks near Pet Place Market. Seattle has a way of making even ordinary moments feel cozy. Rain tapping softly against windows, the smell of roasted coffee beans, people hurrying through wet streets with umbrellas. My life felt steady, predictable, safe. Evenings were my favorite part of the day. When I returned home, Ethan usually ran to the door shouting, "Mom!" Lily would follow behind him, pretending she was too old to run, but she always smiled. Dinner together was our daily ritual. No phones, just conversations about school, soccer practice, art projects, and random funny things that happened during the day. Friday nights were special. They were family movie nights. Pizza boxes on the coffee table, blankets spread across the couch, everyone arguing about what to watch on Netflix. Sometimes we laughed so hard that we had to pause the movie. Looking back now, those small moments meant everything. But back then, I took them for granted. Because like most people, I believed something without even realizing it. I believed I had time. And time to watch my children grow up, time to travel with David someday, time to grow older and wiser. Time to do everything life promised. I never imagined that something inside my own body was quietly counting down that time. But the first signs started appearing long before I understood what they meant. At first, it was the exhaustion, and it changed everything. The first symptom was easy to ignore. Fatigue. Not the normal kind that disappears after a good night's sleep. This felt different. It felt like my body was constantly running on empty. No matter how much rest I got, I woke up tired. At first, I blamed stress. Work had been busy and deadlines were piling up. Anyone in my situation would have assumed the same thing, but the exhaustion didn't go away. Weeks passed, and it actually started getting worse. Like some afternoons at the office, I found myself staring at my computer screen, unable to focus. Design projects that normally excited me suddenly felt overwhelming. Even walking up the stairs at home left me slightly breathless. Still, I convinced myself it was nothing serious. Then the headaches began. Sharp headaches that came without warning. Sometimes they lasted only minutes. Other times they lingered for hours. I started taking painkillers just to get through the day. David noticed the change before I did. One evening while we were cleaning up after dinner, he looked at me carefully. "You look exhausted," he said. "I'm fine," I replied automatically, but he didn't seem convinced. "You've said that for weeks," he said quietly. "And you've barely been eating." That was the second symptom. My appetite had disappeared. At meals I used to enjoy suddenly felt unappealing. Even coffee didn't taste the same. Then the weight loss began. At first I didn't notice, but people around me did. One coworker stopped by my desk one afternoon and said jokingly, "Whatever diet you're doing, it's working." I forced a laugh, but the truth was I wasn't dieting, and the weight kept dropping. My clothes started fitting loosely. My face looked thinner in the mirror. Something felt wrong, but I still didn't want to believe it. Then, one evening, something happened that scared me. I was standing in the kitchen preparing dinner when a sudden pain spread across my chest and into my shoulder. It wasn't sharp, more like a deep pressure. It lasted only a few minutes before fading away. But in those few minutes, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Fear. Later that night, and David sat beside me on the couch. "You've been exhausted, losing weight, and now you're having chest pain," he said. "I think you should see a doctor." I wanted to brush it off. Part of me was afraid of what they might find, but another part of me knew he was right. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was completely silent, and for the first time, a thought crossed my mind that made my stomach tighten. What if something is seriously wrong? The next morning, I scheduled an appointment at Evergreen Medical Center. At the time, I thought I was just being cautious. I expected the doctor to say something simple: stress, vitamin deficiency, maybe even just exhaustion. I never imagined that appointment would lead to something far worse, because the next time I walked into that hospital, my life would change forever. At the appointment at Evergreen Medical Center felt routine at first. When I walked into the hospital that morning, I wasn't particularly worried. I had convinced myself that the doctor would probably say something simple. Maybe stress, maybe low iron, maybe I just needed more sleep. Hospitals always have a strange atmosphere, a mix of quiet urgency and controlled calm. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air as nurses walked past in soft-soled shoes, their voices low and professional. I checked in at the front desk and took a seat in the waiting area. A television mounted on the wall played a morning talk show, but no one was really watching it. People sat quietly, scrolling on their phones or staring at the floor, waiting. After about 20 minutes, a nurse called my name. "Sarah Mitchell?" I stood up and followed her down a long hallway lined with closed doors. The room she led me into was small and brightly lit, with a computer monitor on the desk and a paper-covered examination table against the wall. "Dr. Lawson will be in shortly," she said before leaving. For the next few minutes, I sat there alone, listening to the faint sounds of activity in the hallway outside. Footsteps, muffled voices, the squeak of a rolling cart. Then the door opened. Dr. Karen Lawson, the oncologist reviewing my tests, walked in holding a folder. She greeted me with a warm smile, but something about her expression felt different. Doctors are trained to remain calm, but that morning I noticed a hint of hesitation in her eyes. She sat down across from me and opened the folder slowly. "Sarah," she said gently, "there's no easy way to say this." The moment those words left her mouth, my stomach dropped. Something was wrong, very wrong. She paused briefly, as if choosing her words carefully. "We found a tumor." The word echoed inside my mind. Tumor. For a moment, I just stared at her, waiting for the rest of the sentence, waiting for the reassuring part. but instead, she continued, "It's cancer." The room suddenly felt smaller. My ears began ringing slightly, like the sound of distant static. She continued speaking, explaining the scans and what they had discovered, but then came the part that shattered everything. Based on the imaging, the cancer has already spread. My chest tightened as the weight of those words settled in. Then she said something I will never forget. Based on the progression, we estimate about 3 months. 3 months. 3 months to live. It felt like time had stopped. Images flooded my mind all at once. My children, my husband, our house, family vacations, birthday candles, all the moments I had assumed I would be there for. Gone. I remember gripping the armrest of the chair just to steady myself. Dr. Lawson continued explaining treatment options, but her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from the other side of a long tunnel. Eventually, the appointment ended. I walked out of the office in a daze. The hallway seemed longer than before. The world outside the hospital looked exactly the same. Cars driving, people walking, a couple laughing near the entrance. Life continuing like nothing had changed. But inside me, everything had collapsed. Before I continue my story, I want to say something quickly. If stories like mine inspire you, please subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who might need hope today. Because sometimes hearing someone else's story can remind us that we're not alone. Now let me tell you about the hardest part of all, going home. The drive home from the hospital is something I still remember clearly. Seattle traffic moved slowly along the wet streets, windshield wipers brushing away the light rain that had started falling. Normally, I would have turned on the radio, but that day, the car was completely silent. I gripped the steering wheel while my mind repeated the same words again and again. 3 months, 3 months, 3 months. How do you process something like that? How do you drive home knowing that your life suddenly has an expiration date? By the time I pulled into our driveway, my hands were shaking. For a moment, I just sat in the car staring at the front door of our house. Inside that house were the people I loved most in the world, and somehow I had to tell them I was dying. When I walked inside, the house was quiet. David was still at work, and the kids hadn't come home from school yet. The silence felt overwhelming. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at nothing for a long time. My mind raced through memories. Lily learning to ride a bike, Ethan scoring his first soccer goal, David proposing to me on a rainy evening years ago. Every memory suddenly felt like something I was about to lose. I broke down crying. Not quiet tears, the kind of crying that comes from deep inside your chest, the kind that makes it hard to breathe. For the next few days, I didn't tell anyone, not even David. I walked around the house pretending everything was normal, but inside, I was falling apart. Every time I looked at my children, my heart ached. One evening, Lily sat beside me at the kitchen table doing homework. "Mom," she said, "can you help me with this math problem?" I helped her the way I always did, but while I explained the answer, a terrifying thought kept repeating in my mind. Will I even be here next year? The fear was unbearable. I stopped going to work. I stopped answering calls from friends. I barely left the house. The world outside felt distant and meaningless. Eventually, the weight of the secret became too heavy to carry. One afternoon, David came home early from work and found me sitting in the living room surrounded by old photo albums. My face was swollen from crying. He knelt beside me immediately. "Sarah, what's wrong?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words felt impossible to say, but finally I whispered the truth. "I'm dying." His face changed instantly. "What do you mean?" And then I told him everything. The diagnosis, the cancer, the 3 months. The silence that followed felt endless, but then he grabbed my hands tightly. "We are not giving up," he said. I wanted to believe him, but at that moment, I didn't have any hope left, because in my mind, my story was already over. But something unexpected was about to happen, something that would change the way I saw everything. For the next 2 weeks after my diagnosis, life felt like I was walking through fog. Everything looked the same on the outside, but inside my mind, Nothing felt real anymore. I stopped making long-term plans. I stopped thinking about the future entirely. And every morning when I woke up, my first thought was the same: 3 months. That number had become a shadow that followed me everywhere. I watched my children more closely than I ever had before. Lily sitting on the couch sketching in her notebook. Ethan practicing soccer moves in the backyard, pretending the fence was a cheering crowd. Normal moments suddenly felt fragile, temporary. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the hallway watching them laugh together, and a painful realization hit me: I might not see them grow up. That thought was unbearable, but the strange thing about grief is that it doesn't always explode all at once. Sometimes it settles slowly inside you, quietly, like a weight pressing down on your chest. A few weeks later, I returned to Evergreen Medical Center for another appointment. The waiting room looked the same as before: rows of chairs, muted television, people sitting quietly with worried expressions. I sat down and stared at the floor, trying not to think about the reason I was there. That's when someone sat beside me, an older woman with short gray hair and kind eyes. She looked calm, almost peaceful. After a few minutes, she smiled at me. "You look like someone carrying a very heavy story," she said gently. I let out a small, tired laugh. "You could say that." Something about her presence made it easier to talk. Eventually, I told her everything: the diagnosis, the 3 months, the fear that had taken over my life. She listened quietly without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. Then she said something that completely caught me off guard. "They told me the same thing." I blinked. "What?" "They told me I had about 3 months to live," she said calmly. My stomach tightened. That was 8 years ago. I stared at her. 8 years? "That's impossible," I whispered. She smiled softly. "Doctors give estimates," she said, "not guarantees." Her words stayed with me long after our conversation ended. On the drive home that day, I kept thinking about what she said. Doctors give estimates. For the first time since my diagnosis, something inside me shifted. A small spark, hope, not certainty, but possibility. And possibility was enough. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed. The house was quiet. The same quiet that once felt peaceful now felt meaningful. And I made a decision. If I only had 3 months, I wasn't going to spend them waiting to die. I was going to live, really live. I was going to make every single day count, and that decision changed everything. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I went outside for a walk. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a slow walk around the neighborhood. The cool Seattle air felt refreshing against my skin. The trees rustled gently in the breeze. For the first time in weeks, I felt present in the moment, not trapped inside my fear. The walks became a daily habit. At first, they lasted only 10 minutes, then 20, then longer. Something about moving forward physically helped me move forward mentally. Around the same time, Dr. Lawson recommended I join a cancer support group. At first, I didn't want to go. The idea of sitting in a room full of sick people felt terrifying. But eventually, I decided to try. The first meeting was emotional. People shared stories about diagnoses, treatments, fear, and hope. Some had been fighting cancer for years. Others were newly diagnosed like me. Listening to them made me realize something important. I wasn't alone. We were all fighting the same invisible battle. Slowly, my mindset began to change. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" I started asking a different question. What can I do with the time I have? I began spending more intentional time with my family. We went on short hikes. We cooked dinner together. We laughed more, talked more, appreciated moments that once felt ordinary. My treatments began soon after. Chemotherapy is something no one truly understands until they experience it. The fatigue was overwhelming. Some days I could barely get out of bed. Other days I felt nauseous for hours. My hair started falling out in small clumps. The first time I noticed it on my pillow, I sat quietly staring at it. Cancer was no longer invisible. It had become real, visible. But strangely, the physical changes didn't scare me as much as the diagnosis had, because mentally, something inside me had grown stronger. Then something unexpected happened. At one of my follow-up scans, Dr. Lawson walked into the room looking puzzled. She studied the images carefully before turning to me. "The tumor hasn't grown," she said slowly. "In fact, it had slightly shrunk." She couldn't fully explain it, but hearing those words felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater. For the first time since my diagnosis, the future didn't feel completely closed. But just when things started improving, something happened that nearly took everything away again. One night, about 3 months into my treatment, I woke up suddenly. My chest felt tight. It was difficult to breathe. At first, I thought it was just anxiety, but the pressure kept growing. David woke up beside me and immediately saw the panic on my face. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "I can't breathe," I whispered. Within minutes, he was rushing me to the emergency room. The ride to the hospital felt endless. The streetlights blurred past the windows while I struggled to breathe. A terrifying thought filled my mind. This might be the end. When we arrived at the hospital, doctors rushed me into a treatment room. Machines beeped around me as nurses worked quickly. For a moment, I truly believed my story was ending right there. But something strange happened in that moment of fear. I wasn't angry, I wasn't panicking. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Peace, because I had already made a decision weeks earlier. Whether I lived 3 months or 30 years, I was going to live every moment fully. And if that night was the end, I knew I had finally started living the right way. But the night wasn't the end. In fact, it was another turning point, because what happened next surprised everyone, even my doctors. The next morning in the hospital, something shifted. After the terrifying night, I expected everything to feel fragile. But instead, I woke up with clarity. David was sitting beside me, holding my hand. The machines beeped softly in the background, but for the first time since my diagnosis, I felt calm. I realized something important. Cancer had not just threatened my life, it had forced me to see life differently. Over the next few weeks, my body slowly recovered from the emergency episode. Chemotherapy continued, but the side effects became manageable. My hair began to grow back. The nausea became less constant. I could sleep through the night again. But more importantly, emotionally, I was stronger than ever. I started keeping a journal again, writing down moments I was grateful for. Lily painting her first self-portrait in watercolors. Ethan scoring the winning goal in his soccer game. David making his signature pancakes on Sunday mornings. Every day, I noted one thing I was thankful for, no matter how small. I had learned the hardest lesson possible. Life is fragile, but life is also precious. And even in the shadow of death, joy exists. It's been 4 years since that fateful day when Dr. Lawson told me I had 3 months to live. 4 years. Every milestone since then has felt miraculous. My children are growing up fast. Lily is painting incredible portraits, and Ethan is unstoppable on the soccer field. David and I have taken trips we never thought we'd manage, including a long weekend in San Francisco and a quiet retreat in the Cascade Mountains. I still attend support groups, not because I'm afraid, but because I want to help others see what's possible. Doctors still monitor me closely, but the prognosis that once seemed final no longer defines me. The cancer is part of my life, yes, but it doesn't control me. It never controls me again. If you are watching this and facing fear, illness, or uncertainty, I want you to hear this. Your story isn't over. Even when it feels like everything has collapsed, hope can exist. Even in the darkest moments, a spark can appear. Sometimes it's a person you meet, sometimes a thought you have, sometimes the quiet decision to choose life anyway. I may live with this disease, but it no longer defines me. It does not control my joy, my family, or my purpose. Life after a diagnosis is still life, and it can still be beautiful. You can still laugh, love, and build memories. You can still live fully, no matter what the doctors say. I want to leave you with this thought. If my story inspires you, even just a little, share it with someone who might need hope today. Because hope, sometimes it's the thing that saves us before medicine ever can. And remember, no matter the odds, no matter the prognosis, you have the power to choose life. And you have the power to live fully. And if I can survive against the odds, so can you. Take a moment to share this story to inspire hope, strength, and encouragement for everyone who is battling one illness or difficulty or another. Subscribe and turn on the notification button